Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Today we're diving into a really fascinating period. It's all about, well, instruction and change. Guided by the government, we're looking at the Kansei reforms.
Yeah, this was late 18th, early 19th century, a time when the government really tried to guide and reshape society quite intensely.
So where does this story start? What was the backdrop?
We're talking the late 1780s. Edo had just gone through some pretty serious urban unrest, the Uchikawashi.
Ah, right. Tumultuous times.
Definitely. And into this steps Matsudaira Sadanobu. He was the grandson of the 8th shogun Yoshimune. Quite a pedigree.
Okay.
He became a senior counselor at Roju in 1787. Then the very next year, chief advisor to the 11th shogun, Ienari. So, quite powerful.
So he's in a key position, and there's this feeling that things need to change.
Absolutely. His big mission was government reform. And these efforts, well, they became known as the Kansei reforms.
And first steps, what did he tackle initially?
One of the first things was dismantling the legacy of his predecessor, Tanuma Okitsugu, a real shift.
How so? What did that look like in practice?
Well, he basically shut down most of the profit-making schemes Okitsugu had started.
Okay.
And he even got rid of some taxes on the merchant guilds, the kabunakama.
Interesting. So less focus on commerce.
Exactly. It signals a real intention to, cut ties with commercial capital, maybe move back towards a more agrarian, morally conservative vision.
And this instruction wasn't just economic policy, right? It targeted specific groups.
Definitely. The samurai class, for instance, they were often in serious debt.
The lower-ranking ones especially.
The Hatamoto and Gokunin. So Sadanobu issues the debt cancellation edict, the Kinrei.
Which did what, exactly?
It basically instructed the moneylenders, the Fudasashi, to just cancel the samurai's debts. A pretty direct intervention.
Wow. That must have provided some relief, but maybe upset the lenders.
Oh, for sure. But the aim was clear. Stabilize this key part of the ruling class. It was financial instruction, in a way.
Okay, so that's the samurai. What about the common people? Rural and urban?
Big focus there, too. Revitalizing agriculture was a top priority.
How did they try to achieve that?
Well, they actively encouraged peasants who, drifted into the cities looking for work to return to their home villages, steer them back to the land.
Just encourage them, or?
More than that, they provided actual aid. Farming tools, food supplies for the really poor ones.
Ah, okay. Practical help.
Right. Trying to help them become self-sufficient again back in the countryside. Direct instruction, you could say, backed by resources.
Yeah, Edo itself had its own problems, didn't it? You mentioned the earlier unrest.
Yeah, and one big issue was the number of vagrants and homeless people, Furosha and Mushakusha.
A common problem in big cities.
Yeah.
How did Sadanobu's government instruct them?
They set up the Ishikawajima Rehabilitation Center and Ninsoku Yoseiba.
Rehabilitation, so not just a prison.
Well, it was partly for detention, keeping public order, but crucially, it also offered vocational training.
Like what?
Handicrafts, things like that. The idea was to give these people skills, a way to support themselves. Instruction towards self-reliance, even in detention.
Seems like they were also thinking about preventing future crises, learning from the past.
Definitely. The Tenmei famine, which had been horrific, was still fresh in memory.
So what instructions came out of that?
Promoting community granaries was a big one. Shaso and Jiso, places to store rice, kakoimai, all across the country.
Like local reserves for bad times?
Exactly. Instruction in community preparedness. Build resilience locally.
And in Edo, there was that saving system, the 7/10ths.
Right, the shichibuzukin, or 7/10 savings. This was pretty specific instruction.
How did it work?
Each town ward, every machi, was instructed to save 70% of the money they managed to economize from their regular town expenses, the machine yuyo.
70%, that's quite a bit. Mandated savings.
Yes, mandated. The goal was to build up funds specifically for relief.
For what kind of situations?
Fires, which were common in Edo, and of course, famines or other disasters.
Did it work?
Actually, yeah. Reports suggest this system really did help a lot of people during later crises. It's a fascinating example of enforced community saving, proactive instruction.
But the government's idea of instruction went beyond just practical matters, didn't it? It touched on ideas, on thought itself.
Oh, absolutely. Sadanobu really disliked criticism of politics and society, especially from scholars.
So control.
Strict control over speech, over thought. The prime example is the Kansei Edict of Heterodoxy in 1790. Kansei gaku no kin.
Okay, heterodoxy. What did that ban? specifically?
It restricted teaching at the official shogunate academy, the Seido Gakumonjo, to only Neo-Confucianism.
Just one school of thought.
Specifically, the Zushi school, Shushigaku. All other schools were banned from being taught there.
Wow. And this academy was important.
Very. Official recruitment exams were also limited to testing knowledge of Zushi thought. It really narrowed the intellectual highway, so to speak.
And didn't the academy itself change?
Yeah, the private Hayashi clan school was basically taken over and transformed into the official shogunate academy at Shohizaka Gakumonjo, centralizing ideological instruction.
What about other forms of expression? Books.
Those were controlled too. Novels, other writings considered critical of the government or bad for public morals were suppressed.
Which probably didn't go down too well with everyone.
No, it definitely caused dissatisfaction among the townspeople. And they even held regular Confucian lectures for the shogun's direct retainers, the jikizan, reinforcing the official line.
This desire for control, for kind of instructing people on the right way to think and act,
Yeah.
how did it play out with the outside world? That seems like another area where control would be important.
Very much so. Look at the case of Hayashi Shihei.
What happened to him?
He published works like Kaikoku Haiden arguing for stronger coastal defenses.
Seems practical given the time.
You'd think so, but he was punished in 1792. The government felt his writings were stirring up unnecessary public anxiety, causing unrest.
Punished for advocating preparedness. That's ironic.
Especially since, right around then, a Russian envoy, Laxman, actually showed up in Nemuro, in Ezo, that's Hokkaido.
Really? What did he want?
He was returning some Japanese castaways, including a merchant named Daikokuya Kadayu, who drifted to Russia. And importantly, he was asking to open trade relations.
So, the outside world was knocking. How did Sadanobu react to that after punishing Hayashi?
Well, his response was to strengthen coastal defenses. So, kind of a contradiction there, but the reality was becoming undeniable.
So, awareness was growing.
Yeah.
Of Russia, Britain, America.
Yes, the sense that foreign powers were approaching Japan was definitely increasing.
And this led to more focus on the northern borders.
It did. We see early explorations of the Tsushima Islands and Sakhalin by figures like Kondo Juzo and Mamiya Winzo around this time.
Trying to understand that frontier better.
And eventually, Izu itself was brought under direct shogunate control. The idea was to bolster defenses in the north.
It's interesting, you mentioned Daikokuya Koryu. There were other castaways too, right? Like Nakahama Manjiro later on.
Yes, Majiro, Hamada Hikozo. These individuals had incredible experiences overseas.
But Japan itself remained largely closed.
Right. Their stories offered these rare, personal glimpses of the world outside, but official policy remained very restrictive. Limited instruction from the outside, you could say.
Now, Sadanobu, despite all these reforms and instructions, his time at the top wasn't actually that long.
No, only about 6 years. He was dismissed.
And what came after? Did the reforms stick?
Not entirely. The following era, often called the Daigosho era, saw the 11th shogun Inari continue to wield influence even after retiring. This was the Bunkabunsei period, early 19th century.
It was different from Sadanobu's time.
Oh, quite different. It's
Yeah.
often seen as a period of, well, lax governance, corruption creeping back in, extravagance, a real contrast to the austerity Sadanobu tried to enforce.
And this loosening of control, did it coincide with other problems?
Unfortunately, yes. This era saw the devastating Tenpo famine in the 1830s.
Another major famine.
A really severe one. Widespread crop failures, starvation in both the countryside and cities. It shows that Sadanobu's earlier instructions on preparedness, like the granaries, perhaps weren't maintained or were insufficient for a crisis of this scale.
And famine often leads to
Unrest, exactly. Peasant uprisings, Hayakusho Iki, and more urban riots, Ushikowashi.
any specific incidents stand out?
The Oshio Hahachiro Rebellion in Osaka, 1837, that was a big one.
Oshio Hachiro.
Who was he?
He was actually a former low-level official in Osaka, a yoriki, and also a respected scholar, interestingly, of Wang Yangming philosophy, Yomigaku.
A scholar leading a rebellion.
Yes, he led an uprising of impoverished people, basically protesting the government's, or rather the local officials, inaction and perceived indifference during the famine.
Did it succeed?
No, it was put down relatively quickly, but the impact was huge.
Why?
Because it was led by a former official, an intellectual. It sent shockwaves through the ruling class. It showed the depth of the desperation and anger.
And it inspired others. It did. There was another revolt led by Ikudaman in Echigo shortly after, directly influenced by Oshio's actions. It really highlighted the fragility beneath the surface.
So looking back at the Kansei reforms, It's this major attempt at top-down instruction, trying to guide everything from the economy to people's thoughts.
Exactly. A really comprehensive effort to restructure society, addressing debt, poverty, social order, ideology, defense.
Some measures, like the saving system or debt relief, clearly had some positive effects, at least temporarily.
Right. Some provided real relief, and things like the granaries were good ideas in principle. But the era also really throws into sharp relief the tension between that kind of government control, that intensive instruction, and what the people actually wanted or needed.
And the limits of that control, especially with famine and lurking in the background, the pressures from the outside world.
Precisely. Those pressures weren't going away. Sadanobu tried to manage them, control the narrative, but the world was changing around Japan.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How effective can these top-down efforts to instruct and shape a whole society really be?
Especially when they clash with, individual lives, changing circumstances, and these bigger global forces.
Yeah. Are there lessons from this Kansei experiment in instruction, maybe about the balance between guidance and freedom, that still feel relevant when we think about societies today?